So speak life, when the sun won't shine and you don't know why. Look into the eyes of the broken hearted, watch them come alive as soon as you speak hope, you speak love, you speak life.
Welcome to Dealing with Life. I'm Tom Baker, author of One Dog's Faith, and I'm excited to have you right here with us. This week's show is brought to you by Malone Dentistry. This is a show that happens every week at this time. We talk to people who have dealt with serious issues and found victory and a deepened faith through that process. And it's always been inspiring to hear those people's story, and I hope you get inspired by listening to them. We also talk with people who are called to help others, and that's what today is all about. The subject, I think, is going to revolve around hope. Hope is something that without it, everything looks dark. Everything looks difficult. And with hope, the possibilities are endless. Through God, the most powerful thing in the universe, there's always hope. We just tend as humans to focus so much on our struggles that hope seems just a little bit out of grasp. I want to dive into that today. With me in the studio today is Nathan West. Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Tom.
Nathan is a counselor at Ebenezer Counseling. I've been really excited about this show because worry and anxiety are things that I have dealt with all my life, and really kind of getting the better of it. I talk about it a lot, ways to beat it, but I really want your perspective as a counselor on this. You deal with it a lot. And first, before we dig into the subject, I think what we will focus on is anxiety and depression, is what you deal with a lot, right?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Tell me first about you and your involvement with Ebenezer, and what's Nathan all about?
Okay, sure, yeah. Well, I actually just began with Ebenezer just a couple months ago. Been doing therapy for a few years, but just started out here. Been in the Knoxville area for about 3 years. Love it.
Nice.
Here, love the outdoors.
Welcome.
My wife and I. Yeah, thank you. It's a great place. Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the
it
country. Yeah, so yeah.
And you're getting a doctorate now?
Yes, yeah, you're working on a doctorate now. So yeah, still going along in school and trying to balance everything, juggle everything. And
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Now, Ebenezer Counseling, in the tiny bit of research I've done, you guys are how many now?
I just counted. I think we're up to 27.
27
Yeah.
strong,
Yeah,
in two
absolutely.
locations.
In 2 locations.
And what's different about Ebenezer Counseling is you guys are Christian counselors.
Yes. Yeah. It's a Christian-based counseling center, and
Which, to me, those go together. But it certainly isn't the norm in your field. Define, if you would, Nathan, kind of what is a Christian counseling service or operation? What's the difference?
Sure. Yeah. This is something I've been even thinking about a lot lately and trying to figure out what that means for myself. I think Christian counseling, I think it brings in a lot of ideas and approaches from counseling more broadly. You know, like what's going on in the counseling world, research, and what's cutting edge and what's happening. But also it has a more primary focus on a Christian worldview and what that means. And
Right.
I was talking to you before about there's some ideas, things like forgiveness and like self-worth and being created in God's image and some things like that that are have a powerful meaning within a Christian worldview. And so I think you can expect kind of that understanding and being on the same page there, and those have a lot to say about what hope means and
absolutely.
how we talk about that, as you were just talking about hope.
Yeah. I mean, it's to me, I don't know how you can improve. I don't know how you can find focus without hope. I mean, it's such a powerful thing. I know that counseling, and you can correct me at any point, but counseling is really helping someone dig into their struggles.
Sure.
Is that pretty much I mean, how do
Yeah.
you view that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I see counseling as a partnering. As I think that's what drew me to counseling in the first place, was seeing when I first sort of approached it and went to counseling myself, I kind of expected this kind of to be studied and it to be this very like laboratory.
Well, somebody with a notebook going,
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think what for me is powerful and is beautiful about it is that it's a partnering. It's we're going to work together. We're going to join together and look at this stuff and not in a judgmental way, or I'm going to put you down with these things, but how can we dive in and how can we be better? How can we be what you want to be? How can life be more fulfilling for you? Or,
Right.
How can we find growth and healing? And so it is just kind of a diving in as partners, being on the same team.
Right. Oh, that gives hope right there. So your area of expertise, what do you deal with most?
We talked about, in general, depression and anxiety. I think in addition to that, grief issues and dealing with major life transitions, with changes that are expected and changes that are unexpected.
Right.
I think I talked to a lot of people about just those developmental periods in life where things change so sharply. Whether that's going from high school to college, or college to the world of work. And figuring out what am I going to do with my life, and or maybe like career changes, or maybe major family changes. And I mentioned grief, and specifically with losing someone,
Right.
With a family member dying or something like that. Just some of those very difficult periods of life.
Well, I think change is what humans are allergic to. That's the one thing that we fear most, I think, or we worry about most. And then when it happens, we just get into a tizzy. And, it's funny to me, I'm sure I'm not alone, but you can be in the greatest mood and you can be so positive, and one little thing, one sharp statement from a family member or a friend can just turn everything around, and change just sends us, and some can recover quickly and some can just dwell on it forever. I mean, what's your thought?
Sure. Yeah, I think change is scary. I think it lets us know that we're not in control. Kind of reminds us that we're not in control. I think
like we were in the first place.
Right. Yeah. I think we have that illusion sometimes,
Yeah.
that we're in control and that we find safety in that. And then when things change and we're not in control of those changes, that's a pretty scary place, and it makes us question things. And I think that's where we get into a lot of, like turning things over to God, or turning things over to the Creator, being able to kind of let go and feel at peace with things. And that's a hard thing for all of us to do.
Yeah, and that was part of my healing, is realizing, one, what's important, and two, who really is in control, and do I trust him? I'm sure that's a difficult issue for many. It has been for me, and that was a big part of my healing from difficult things. So, one thing that strikes me, and I'm sure you may deal with this a lot, is the worldview, and even the view of Christians many times are, well, I'm a Christian, nothing bad's supposed to happen. A pastor I once heard not too long ago say he went through a very difficult period where he was sick, and he wasn't able to work. He was bed-stricken for a while, and somebody came up to him and said, "This isn't supposed to happen to you." And he's like, "Why?" I'm still human. And he's, well, no, you're supposed to get a free pass. No, Christians have as much struggle as anybody else. But I think the difference is hope. So, I mean, when you're, I obviously don't want to get into personal issues when in patients, but in general, what do you see out there? What do you see as problems for people?
I talked about those kind of, we talked about change
Sure.
and development, and I think there are so many places in life. I think even positive changes are difficult for us to deal with, to learn to live in new ways. I think from the beginning of our lives, we start learning like how to deal with life, how to solve problems, And I think what I see a lot is we learn how to solve a problem in one area of life, and then we get to the next area or the next stage, and it's like, those ways that I used to deal with problems
That's
don't
not
work
working
anymore.
Well, even like if you get a big, great promotion and you've been trying to get it for 6 months, and then they announce it, and the second after you are all excited, you go, "Oh crap. What now? How am I going to do? I'm not good enough for this."
Yeah.
I mean, change,
Yeah.
even positive change is difficult.
So absolutely, and it's and like you mentioned, like I'm not good enough for this. That sort of imposter syndrome. I think we all feel like imposters, and so it's
true.
It's it's just kind of letting our guard down and saying like, I'm getting to those deep rooted questions of like, am I good enough? Am I worth something? Am I able to deal with this? To have relationships? To be the person that I want to be?
I'm not really the person that I'm telling everybody else I am.
Right. Yeah. And so I think those are some things that kind of like some threads that I see just kind of running through all types of issues that we deal with. You talked about different types of anxiety or different types of depression experiences, or in addictions, and in dealing with grief and making sense of losses that we've had. And all those things I've seen, I think those are some common threads. How do I cope with this new thing?
Yeah, and cope. That's it rhymes with hope. So in your world, in the world of counseling, I guess there's coping, and I guess there's moving beyond. Sometimes you have to deal with it, and sometimes you have to move away from it and just say, this isn't worth worrying about. So as a counselor, what do you do? Again, I don't want to get personal with you and your patients, but where do you start with somebody? Somebody comes in and says, I'm a mess, and I don't know how to cope with the issues that are going on. Where do you start?
I think with two of the words you said, what is a mess? What does that mean for you, and how long have you felt that way? And then what does it mean to cope? What does coping look like? If you were coping, what would that look like?
Yeah.
How would life be different if you were coping, or if you were able to move on from this thing that you?
Wow, I'm already feeling the therapy.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's one of the things that you're very trained to do and very called to do, is ask the right questions. Is to get people to start, instead of sitting there going, "How bad am I?" to start understanding it.
Sure. Yeah. To dive in, and I talked earlier about kind of partnering, and empathy is one of those core principles of what we try to do, and it's just to try to understand where you're coming from, to try to see what it feels like to be where you are. Okay. So as you think about like, man, I am just a mess. What does it feel like to be a mess? What does that mean, and how do you describe that and break that down?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I get that. So back to Ebenezer Counseling for a second. What is the main focus? I mean, I know that since you have 27 therapists and counseling, there's different subjects, but what's the common theme?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. I think really, as I kind of look through, you can look on the website and see like different specialties for each person, each therapist there, and you see like a pretty wide range. You see people who deal with trauma, with addictions, with depression and anxiety. I think those are two of the more common you'll see on there. Okay. With family issues and marriage counseling, and premarital counseling.
Which is so vital.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
You've got to be able to understand each other before you get married, not
right.
after.
Another one of those major transition points. Right?
Well, yeah. That is stress-inducing as well as just a whole life change. Yeah. Absolutely. Nathan West with Ebenezer Counseling. We're just scratching the surface here. We've got a lot to talk about, and I really am so glad you're here. This is Dealing with Life. I'm Tom Baker, author of One Dog's Faith, a book about life, faith, and worry through the eyes of a dog. Maybe you need a dog counselor there. Mango could do that.
That sounds great.
You just pay her with dog food. I don't know. This week's show is brought to you by Malone Dentistry, Family and Restorative Dentistry. They've been here for 20 years. right off Kingston Pike on South Peters Road. Learn more at knoxvillesmiles.com. We'll deal with more in just a moment.
Here comes a comeback. This is your time, your moment. The fight, you're golden. You've come so far, keep going. Oh, here comes a comeback. Love when you can, cry when you have to, feel you must, that's a part of the plan. Await your arrival with simple survival, and one day we'll all understand.
You're listening to Dealing with Life. I'm Tom Baker, author of One Dog's Faith. Today's program brought to you by Malone Dentistry. We're talking with Nathan West of Ebenezer Counseling and having a really powerful and inspiring conversation about dealing with depression and anxiety. Nathan, you deal with that a lot, I'm sure. And tell me, first of all, kind of define depression, and maybe in that separate anxiety and depression and help us with the difference. So first of all, define depression. What's your definition of depression?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a tough question because it can look different for different people.
Well, that makes sense.
It can be, yeah, it can be. It's a very individual and personal experience. I think some things that you see in common are just general feelings of unhappiness, not feeling happy, maybe kind of a numbness even, and like a clouded mind, a clouded experience, not being able to enjoy things that you once enjoyed very much, or not finding interest in those things, not finding a lack of energy, and maybe particular with maybe used to. Maybe there was a time where you felt very, energized by being around other people and being with your friends or family, and then now you find yourself just withdrawing and just kind of wanting to stay in a
Right, just kind of in a shell.
Yeah, kind of feeling like you're in a shell. So I think
and everything's pushing on you.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked this partly because a difficult period I went through 4 or 5 years ago, and facing financial doom and really, I didn't see a counselor, but I imagine looking back now that it really was depression because I was disengaged from my family. I just felt like everything was out to get me, and I felt like a failure. I felt there were a lot of things that if I look back now, somebody probably could have helped me. but through the grace of God and through my loving wife and through my dog, I really saw peace, and I understood what was important, and I was able to turn. Not everybody can do that. So the role of a Christian counselor is what? What? I mean, I guess you help people sort things out, and where do you go? Where do you go with that?
Sure, I think for me, I believe in the power of connection, of human connection and connection to God. So I think starting with just it can be a powerful experience just to talk about those things, like what the experiences you were just talking about, just to say like, I feel like this.
Yeah.
I feel.
Other
stuck.
than with my
I feel
wife,
hopeless.
I didn't talk about it.
Sure. Yeah.
And that the isolation is stifling.
Yeah. Something that's so powerful about it is feeling alone. And I don't know if you've noticed too, I know for me, like when I have, sometimes something seems so scary and so just big and unapproachable in my mind. And then when it comes out in words, it's like, oh, it wasn't quite as big as it seemed, or scary as it seemed in my mind.
Yeah.
So that can
it does build up in your mind.
Absolutely.
And that's why I talk about worry so much, is because you can do so much to yourself just by worrying about it, and likely it never happens. Sure. And the things that I was worried about never happened. I just took myself into a dark place. So try to separate anxiety and depression. What's kind of, I know everybody's different.
Sure, yeah.
But what's in your eyes? What's the difference?
Yeah, I think another thing that makes the difference tricky is that there's often a lot of overlap. A lot of times when we experience depression, we also experience anxiety, and vice versa.
Okay.
I think some things that divide it where with depression, you see some of those key symptoms of lack of energy, and maybe feelings of worthlessness and some of those things. I think with anxiety, you're going to see different symptoms depending on the type of anxiety you're dealing with, but things like excessive worry. I'm worried all the time. I can't stop thinking about this. I have these intrusive thoughts that always come in. You don't
have an anxiety attack. You can have an anxiety attack, but you can't have a depression attack.
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe that's a separator.
Yeah. So maybe, and if you think about it, like a thermometer, you feel like anxiety can feel like the thermometer's coming up. I just feel like I'm going to explode. It's just I have all this kind of negative energy, and with depression, it can be kind of almost just a lack of any energy. Just kind of feeling listless, and I just feel sluggish, and my mind's not as sharp. So I think with anxiety, you see that, and then you see with both, you can see a lot of physiological symptoms. But I think particularly with anxiety, it can come out in so many different ways, physically, through headaches or through like stomach issues, and the tension, holding tension in your back or in different places. I think I know there have been times in my life where I've thought, someone maybe mentions that what I'm dealing with is stress, and I'm like, I don't feel stressed. I just have a stomach ache, and it's like, sometimes your body can feel those things for you.
Yeah, it tenses up.
Yeah, maybe I don't perceive the emotion of anxiety or stress, but my body is like, no, you're stressed, and this is how I'm showing you, you have to deal with this, or approach this, or you're going to keep having this, the stomach issue.
Right. You can correct me, but in my eyes, I think when you're stressed, when you're anxious, when you're really tensed up with worry, your body kind of goes into what I understand, the same chemical reaction as it does to physical harm. The threat of physical harm.
Yeah.
And I think God designed our body to deal with that temporarily.
Absolutely.
And where I think physical issues start happening is when you remain in that state.
Yeah.
And that's harmful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a common example of anxiety being a good thing when you're being chased by a bear. But if you apply that same amount of that same response to when you're taking a test, then that's not helpful, because I'm shutting down. I'm not able to think clearly and remember the things I studied.
You're only worried about failing.
Right.
That's all you think is failing. I'm failing.
Yeah,
I didn't get this question. Yeah, bear. Oh, I like that. I'm going to use that. Yeah. Bear. So what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? We can get ourselves in such a state of bear all the time that it's hard to climb out.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think that's finding things that have helped you to deal with that before. Finding ways to approach that. Other sources of help that you've encountered before, whether that's people in your life. Things like journaling or some deep breathing exercises, and then through faith, through things like prayer and through like being with other Christians, so like social events and just in faith,
which is difficult to do because you want to isolate.
Right. Yeah. So that's what's tricky. So those can be some helpful things.
Yeah.
But it can be hard to approach those things or to find that help.
Right, and it's like I don't deserve to be happy like that person.
Sure. Yeah,
that's a hard place to be.
Yeah, so that's where I think the counseling comes in. That counseling can be an extremely helpful tool, powerful tool to deal with those things, with depression and with anxiety, and then there's also there are a lot of there's a lot of help to be found in the medical field, and medication is another. Another resource as well.
Right, and I'm assuming, I don't pretend to be an expert, but I'm sure there is chemical depression, and then there is mental. That's not chemically oriented, because I know that some people, the chemicals just get messed up inside, and some people it's very stress, anxiety driven. So I'm sure I don't know if you would qualify that there's two different kinds of depression, but that sounds like that's accurate.
The lines are really blurred there, and I think what's difficult is it's hard for us to say what's going on when, and so I think what it can be different for everyone, as we talked about. And there's certainly there are some therapies that have been shown in research to be, like cognitive behavioral therapy specifically, has been shown to be as effective for many people as medication. So it's like there are talk therapy and behavioral services that can be very effective, and then medication sometimes can be very effective as well. But there's not a test. You can't go and
Sure.
say, like, I have this type or this type.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But kind of finding what works for you, and then what's been most helpful in research for severe depression has been both, a combination of talk therapy and medication. So it really is just kind of figuring out what's helpful for me.
They feed off each other because you get depressed because you're anxious all the time. It's like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And it's just so internal. But I totally see where you're going is when you start talking it out with somebody, you get clarity and you get understanding, and like you said a minute ago, it's not as bad as I thought. And that's so helpful.
Yeah, it can help us to re-examine a lot of our ideas, and I think we have perspectives on ourselves, on the world, on God, on other people in our lives that sometimes we don't even realize those perspectives are there. They're like glasses that we have on that we don't realize are there. So I think something that can be helpful is to kind of look in the mirror and see those glasses and realize, oh, okay, I can look at things a different way.
A different way, exactly.
Yeah.
Nathan West of Ebenezer Counseling is in the studio, and we've got lots more to talk about. This week's show is brought to you by Malone Dentistry, Family and Restorative Dentistry. Dr. Stephen Malone treats you like a member of his family. You get honesty, you get experience, you get personal care. What you expect when you go to the dentist. Dr. Malone and his team of 15 provide comprehensive oral care that includes developing a plan for your mouth. You achieve health, comfort, and confidence. He's been around for nearly 20 years. I've been a patient of his for 20 years. My satisfaction? Well, I've been going there for 20 years. That says a lot. Their goal? To make your experience the best possible. Malone Dentistry. See all the patient reviews at KnoxvilleSmiles.com. This is Dealing with Life. I'm Tom Baker, and we'll deal with more in just a minute.
Hold on when everything is shaking. Stand strong when the ground is falling through. Reach out to my hand in the darkness that's holding you. Music for the people, Jesus, music for the people. Light shine bright, light shine bright. Light shine bright, light shine bright.
You're listening to Dealing with Life. I'm truly honored that you're here. I'm Tom Baker, author of One Dog's Faith, a book about life and worry through the eyes of a dog. The silly things that dogs do might have a little more meaning than you think they do. It's written from the perspective of my dog Mango. And if you're a dog lover or if you're a worrier, I think you'll like it. One Dog's Faith, available through Amazon.com, Cokesbury.com, also at Cedar Springs Christian Store and Long's Drug Store, and Farragut Pharmacy, to name a few. This week's show is brought to you by Malone Dentistry, right off Kingston Pike on South Peters Road, KnoxvilleSmiles.com, Malone Dentistry. Nathan West is with me today from Ebenezer Christian Counseling. I don't think it's called Ebenezer Christian Counseling, but that's what you are. Sure. Ebenezer Counseling. Right. And one thing I want to talk about, we've talked about the kind of separation between what a Christian counselor is and a counselor, and both are very, very helpful, but I love the Christian point of view in terms of healing with anxiety and depression. That's been our subject today. But I think some people listening might have that idea that if they call or try to deal with a Christian counselor, the first word out of that counselor's mouth is, you don't have enough faith. You just need to pray more. And that's got to be furthest from the truth. Sure, yeah.
Definitely in my experience, that's not been the case, or because I think as most listeners may know, and by the time we get to that point, someone gets to that point, it's like if that's a part of my life, that's probably something I've tried already and it's not working, and now I'm here,
Yeah,
so to
I'm
tell me, like,
still struggling.
right, yeah. So it's, that's that feels very dismissive.
Well,
in any case,
it's also defeating, because
Yeah.
you can sit there and tell yourself, if I just had more faith, this would be okay.
Right.
And there is truth to that,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not the simple answer.
Sure. Yeah. So, that is kind of a defeating message, and kind of a blaming message, and
Yeah.
it's like I'm putting myself out here by saying I need help, and then to be shut down immediately, or or kind of the finger pointed out, like you mentioned earlier. That's
not helpful.
That's not helpful, right? That doesn't make me feel any better about the situation, So
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm leaving now.
yeah. So I think what is more helpful, and what I've seen in my experiences is that sort of like I talked about earlier, that partnering, that joining, and saying like, okay, where are you with this, and where can we go from here? What roads do you see, and what do you want to see, and what are you looking for? What kind of growth, and what kind of relationships?
Well, depression and anxiety and worry, all we can use them all kind of in the same sentence, can just take all that away. You don't even know where you're going, and you don't know what you want anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's something you just try to sort out, I'm sure.
Yeah, just to kind of sit in and sometimes just kind of approaching that with another person. I think one thing that is so scary about these things is when we approach them on our own, they can be too scary to look at. Those things that we're worried about, or my depressive thoughts. Some thoughts like, am I worthless? Am I not good for anything? Those are really scary. So to join it with another person and look at those thoughts together can be a really powerful experience, because it's like, it's not so scary when I have someone with me and when I'm not so
true.
alone.
Very true. Now, these would be my own personal feelings, but if you consider calling a counselor, it's kind of like, I must be really bad off if I'm going to talk to a counselor. It's where people just feel like they're totally out of control. And what do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I understand. I mean, I think there's something kind of that's maybe it's just in our culture, or that feels natural about that. For me, saying like, oh, I've got to ask for help. I think asking for help in general can be a difficult thing to say. Like, I can't do this on my own.
Yes.
But I think what I say to that is, none of us can. All of us. If you look around, everyone that you see in the world has their own issues, and I'm not special.
I'm not the only one.
Right? Yeah.
Everybody else's life is perfect. Look at Facebook. Everybody's smiling.
Right. Yeah. So that's getting at somebody where we see some of those facades, and that can be why am I the only one who struggles? I think, well, we all do, and I'd say I think we can all benefit from counseling at some points in our life. We all encounter difficulties that are that we can't really handle on our own. But I do think that stigma is very much a part of our culture. I think it seems like it's improved in a lot of ways, and over
maybe
the years.
so.
But
maybe so.
But still is we've got a long way to go with being able to admit that we have issues.
Certainly, and belief is also an issue. It's not whether we believe God is there, it's whether we believe He can help us. During my last major struggle, I believed in God. I just didn't believe what He said, that He will take care of us, and He will give us strength, and He will walk beside us in difficult times. And I didn't believe that, and that really can take you down. But when you stop and believe that there is help through people like you that He fueled to go into this field, motivated, and that there is help just by believing and having the peace that it's gonna be okay, then there's help, and that makes sense. What fuels you? What's your passion about this? Why do you wake up every day and want to do this?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it's my personal experiences and what the peace and the hope that I've found in it. As I've mentioned several times about that kind of partnering and joining, and I think I felt so much relief in counseling services myself. And over the years, and just saying like, okay, and just having that experience of something being so big and scary in my head, and then it coming out in words and with another person who gets it and who cares. And I think that's a really meaningful thing, and I enjoy being a part of that process.
Sure.
Of just being there and connected to another person, and hearing their stories. And
I'm sure there's victory in there too. That not necessarily patting yourself on the back, but being able to help somebody walk through something and seeing their face decrinkle, and where you see peace come over them. I'm sure that's got to be rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Just seeing the weight kind of leave, and seeing some relief, and in that moment where it's like, maybe I'm not the only one, or maybe I'm not totally alone, or
I'm not a doofus.
Yeah.
I do that a lot.
Right. Sometimes it's just questioning that moment where where we question that belief that's been so heavy for us, and it's just like, maybe I'm not worth nothing, or maybe I'm not completely alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's powerful. And I mean, that's a life lesson in general. I mean, yes, somebody might be going through a very difficult period, but even the little worries and the little struggles can take their toll. And to remember that there's somebody not two people away from you that's going through something much more difficult, and you might be able to help them. But if you're buried in your own struggle, you don't see that. And I think one thing that's been very healing for me is reaching out and trying to help others.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's kind of another like reason, if I'm saying like some motivating reasons to seek counseling and to get help is, before we can help others in a lot of ways, like you were talking about, like we do kind of have to look at ourselves, look in the mirror, and I think in some ways it's like the Jesus's example of like the speck in the plank. I've got to look at the plank in my eye and at my struggles, and see what I deal with before I can be really helpful and maybe see what the issues that other people are dealing with. So, yeah.
Well, it's not, and people say this over and over, but it's so true. It's not what happens; it's how you deal with it. And the either you're defeated and you bury your head in your shirt, or you look out and say, God, let's do this. Let's take this on. And many times you need help sorting that out. And that stigma of not just sitting there saying, you need to have more faith. You have the perspective of not only let's talk about this, but you also have the perspective of God's there. Don't forget God's there. And that's so easy to do. Yeah, okay, we say he's there, but he doesn't care about me. And he does. He really does. Nathan West with Ebenezer Counseling. This is Dealing with Life, brought to you this week by Malone Dentistry, family and restorative dentistry. What will you find when you go there? Honesty, experience, personal care. Dr. Stephen Malone treats you like a member of his own family. His team of 15, they give you comprehensive oral care. It involves developing a plan for your mouth to preserve your teeth for the rest of your lifetime, creating a plan that will give you health, comfort, and confidence. They've been around for nearly 20 years. I've been a patient of theirs for 20 years. Dr. Malone has pursued extensive continuing education. He was the youngest dentist to earn the prestigious status of Pankey Scholar from the Pankey Scholar program. And it shows. They deal with everything from preventative care, restorative care, and also cosmetic. TMJ, if that's a problem, he's an expert, and his TMJ therapy will get you exactly on the right track. He is one of the most foremost scholars in TMJ diagnosis and treatment. Malone Dentistry, right off Kingston Pike on South Peters Road. See KnoxvilleSmiles.com. This is Dealing with Life. We'll deal with more in just a minute.
I go where God and glory shine to one eternal day. I ain't running
listening to Dealing with Life. I'm Tom Baker. Today's show is brought to you by Malone Dentistry. We're talking with Nathan West of Ebenezer Counseling, and we've talked a lot already about anxiety and depression, which you deal with a lot, Nathan, but also one thing you deal with is grief.
Sure.
Which can induce anxiety and depression and whatnot. Grief usually associated with losing someone or maybe losing a job, but it's always has that word losing in it, which is
loss.
Yeah.
Sure.
What occurs to me is there is grief when you do lose someone, and I think God designed that very much in our body, and I think that's very accepted. But there is a point where you got to quit. And get back into the mode of life, and the grief is going to be there, but you have to help it lessen. How do you work that out? How do you deal with people that come in and talk to you about that?
Sure. Well, I think it gets really difficult with those, like the idea of like, I just need to move on or let go, and some of those.
Because you feel like, oh, well, they're not important anymore, and that's
right.
not true.
Yeah, right. So that implication there of like, okay, so I'm supposed, I've got to, they're not important to me anymore. So maybe instead of those terms, thinking, okay, who are they to me now? Who am I now that this person isn't in my, isn't in my day-to-day life anymore?
Yeah.
They
have to redefine.
Sure, yeah. So I think that process is a lot of redefining. Of making and a lot of the kind of where grief like theory and research has gone now has been this like meaning making. Okay, what does it mean now? How do I carry them on in my life, and how do I carry them as a part of my identity going forward? And like you mentioned, live my life, live my day-to-day life, go to work or do whatever I do day to day, and have relationships and live a meaningful life while this person isn't here. So it's kind of stopping and just saying like, who are they to me now, and what do I want life to look like? What would they want for my life?
Sure.
And and just kind of sitting in those questions and like you said, redefining. I think that's a good word.
And I think another difficult part of the grief process for some is they push the grief aside and try to carry on.
Sure.
When it's there, and it's gonna come out.
Yeah, it's gonna, like you said, come out in some part of my life. It's gonna affect me. It's just how can I be aware of that and continue to live day to day, and knowing that that's gonna change too. I think there's some really in like C.S. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed. There's some really nice like imagery of just I think he talks about. Like going through a canyon. I can't remember if he's in a boat or if he's walking, but he's going through some canyons, and he says like at every turn it's a totally different landscape. It's constantly changing. So remembering like how I feel now isn't how I'm going to feel forever.
That's true.
But it is always going to be difficult.
And that is life. We have to embrace that. Yeah. That there are corners that the scenery totally changes, and if we say, this is cool. Then it's a little more accepting, rather than, oh no, this is totally different. I don't get this. I've got to go back.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Kind of finding and knowing that life will never be the way it was. Because sometimes it's like, will it ever be normal again? It's like, well, not like it was.
No,
there will be a new normal.
But it might be better.
Yeah. I might find some meaning in other things. Or in a different way.
Which is what hope is all about.
Sure.
Nathan West, thank you so much for being here. Tell us how does one get a hold of Ebenezer Counseling? And it's a Christian counseling service.
Yeah. Well, you can look at the website. It's ebenezercounseling.com, and it has all the contact information and the addresses for both locations. Everything of that sort is on there, and even information about each therapist and there's areas of interest and things like that. So there's lots of information on the website. That's ebenezercounseling.com.
Right.
And then the phone number is area code 865 670-0988. So that's 865-670-0988. And that is also on the website.
And it's from anxiety and depression, which is and grief is what you deal with. But there's also drug addiction. There's also marriage counseling, a vast array of services that can be very helpful.
Absolutely.
God bless you. Thank you for your imparting of wisdom and being clear. Helped clarify a few things that I think a lot of listeners, me included, have benefited greatly from, and very inspiring.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. This is Dealing with Life. I'm Tom Baker, author of One Dog's Faith. We do this every single week at this time. We either talk with people who have had difficulties and found victory, and we also talk with people like Nathan, who have been called to help others through their struggles. I pray that God shines His glory on you, and I pray that you open your eyes wide enough to see it. This is Dealing with Life.